A medieval manuscript is a unicum, and therefore its value is incalculable, and in the eventuality of its destruction or deterioration, it cannot be replaced. That is why most libraries restrict their access to their manuscripts, with the resulting conflict between the library's duty to preserve the written heritage and the rights of the public to have access to it. Fortunately, nowadays this conundrum is somewhat resolved, at least in some cases, thanks to the existence of a good amount of facsimile editions of medieval codices. According to the Institut International du Livre en Facsimile, a facsimile is defined as a technical and mechanical reproduction of an original two-dimensional model with the aim of reproducing each element of the original, both internal and external, as faithfully as possible, by all the technical means required to grant the preservation of the original and to spread it to satisfy both scientific and artistic interests. A facsimile has to be realized as best as possible to be able to substitute the original in the scientific research and to meet the requirements of the bibliophiles. The word facsimile derives from Latin fac simile, that means make similar, which is already quite self-explanatory. And indeed, a facsimile edition tries to reproduce its original as faithfully as possible. Its original in its present state, including any damage that it might have suffered in any sense, not how it was supposed to be originally. Nothing can be added or suppressed from the original. The first facsimile ever was the reproduction in 1697 of the Goldene Bulle, made by the Frankfurt law historian Heinrich Günther Thülemeyer and Johann Friedrich Fleischer, based on King Wenceslaus Deluxe presentation manuscript. But in the end of the 17th century, the only technology at their disposal was copper plates that had to be worked by hand, which made their accuracy somewhat limited. In any case, the magnitude of the enterprise was unprecedented in its time. The most decisive advancement in the history of the book type we are addressing here occurred finally in the 19th century, with the development of a new printing technique that took advantage of the photographic methods to serve the antique book. The development of lithography as a printing process by the Prague printer Senefelder and the subsequent evolution of the printing process known as Lichtdruck or collotype, as the oldest of all facsimile techniques, made possible the reproduction in print of photographic halftones, that is, grey tones, and with that the possibility of making facsimiles in the modern sense was born. In the period after the Second World War, this tradition was seized in Graz by the Akademische Druck- und Verlagsanstalt Dr. Paul Struzl, ADIVA, which at the same time steered the genre in a fully new direction with the introduction of the offset press lithography process, which became the dominant method in the facsimilation of historical monuments. All facsimile editions are in themselves magnificent and a great help for the researcher, but among them we can distinguish two major types. In the first type we find photographic facsimiles. They are photographic reproductions, either in color or in black and white, of all the pages of a given manuscript in their original size. The second type comprises the so-called pseudo-originals, almost originals, or high-quality facsimiles. In these, every detail of the original has been observed, including the material structure, that is, the gatherings, damages, repairs, binding, and therefore they can be considered as replicas of the original. The production of this type of facsimiles of manuscripts is a relatively recent phenomenon. It began in earnest in the 1970s and has increased with the development of a market for such exquisite objects. This can only be achieved by means of high-tech printing methods, but even so, the processes are lengthy and very time-consuming and require very specialized professionals dealing with very expensive equipment. The process starts with photographs of the original with a special camera and in very controlled conditions that guarantee that the original won't be damaged in any sense. The resulting slides are then digitized and converted to a film impression. For each basic color, an independent film is created, and the details that the computer couldn't handle in a satisfactory way have to be retouched by hand, one by one. As gold and silver cannot be recognized as a proper color, either in the slides or in the digitations, both metals require a good deal of work, and actually, before applying the gold and silver leaves, they need a treatment that in a way is similar to the medieval techniques, delimiting manually the areas where the special glue will eventually be set. Then, a very complex printing process starts with an intensive series of printing trials that are constantly compared to the original and corrected in order to render the best possible quality. And once the result is considered satisfactory, the actual printing starts, not without new comparisons to the original. First, blue and yellow are combined, and then red is added, and then the black and the special glue that will adhere the metals in the last printing phase. Finally comes the tarnish layer that will confer the old appearance to the facsimile. In the following phase, everything is made by hand. The sheets are cut according to the exact size and shape of the original, and then the gatherings are bound, imitating the original binding techniques as well. The result of all this is a beautiful product, which in itself is a sort of paradoxical combination of the most modern technologies with the ancient delicate handcraft. Facsimiles of both sorts, but especially of the almost original one, are a precious instrument for the manuscript scholar, because they offer the integral reproduction that provides the researcher with the complete material he or she requires to analyze the multiple aspects offered by the codex, but without compromising the integrity of the original. And an additional advantage provided by the facsimiles is that they can be acquired by libraries, and therefore a professor from Colorado or from Madrid, for example, can study a manuscript owned by the British Library or the Bibliothèque Nationale, sparing their institutions the costs of traveling to London or to Paris. And even the private manuscript lover can create his or her own library and gather there many of the most beautiful products created by mankind ever. Because although facsimiles are a deluxe product and their production is strictly limited, publishing houses specialized in almost original facsimiles offer their clients very convenient conditions, namely when the facsimile is still in the production process. Occasionally, although by no means always, facsimiles become also attractive investments by some collectors. The 1984 facsimile of the Tres Riches Heirs of the Duke of Berry, for example, sold out long ago, is now much sought after by collectors. In fact, due to the great demand to own a true copy of the original, the publishers produced a further limited edition of the calendar pages. The rarity and fame of this particular manuscript facsimile virtually corresponds to that of the original. A final attraction of facsimiles is that each edition includes as well a study volume written by a team of specialists in different disciplines that offers the possibility of understanding the manuscript in its various aspects and from almost every possible point of view. The historical and cultural context, the codicological analysis, the history of the manuscript itself, the transcription of the text, and the description of the iconographic programs are some of the aspects most often included in the study volumes. Anyway, facsimiles will never be totally a substitute for the original and are not devoid of drawbacks. First, it is unthinkable to produce a facsimilation of the whole corpus of medieval manuscripts. The criteria followed by publishing houses depend mostly on the artistic importance of the manuscripts, their preservation condition, and the policies of the libraries and the market demands. Moreover, while the aim of a facsimile is to provide an object that is as close as possible to the original, a major difference between the original and the copy is that facsimile technology has not been able to replicate the feel of vellum or parchment. The touch of an original manuscript often reveals an uneven texture on account of the natural properties of the particular animal skin used, and also where sections of text may have been scrapped away to make amendments. Vellum also has a hair side and a flesh side, reminding the reader of the material's origin, something that cannot be easily duplicated by technology. But who knows? At least one Spanish publishing house that I know of claims that they have developed the technology to print on parchment. And maybe here, as in many fields depending on high technologies, the sky seems to be the limit. We shall see.